Everybody, good evening. Welcome to the webinar. Today is Wednesday. It's not Wednesday. Yeah, it is Wednesday. I'm getting my days mixed up. March 30th, 2016. So tonight I'm going to talk about enmeshment, but I also had a visit to the field yesterday and felt like the clients. I visited an adolescent, an adolescent boys group. And I felt a real strong connection between them and you through the webinar. So I wanted to share some of my observations. Then I'm going to go into enmeshment, but that's what I want to do tonight. I wanted to tell you that when I shared with the boys my role in the company, and first of all, many of them knew that I did what I did because they had heard from their parents. At least half of them knew me by name. And what that told me was their parents were sharing with them the lessons. Some of the boys read to me the letters that they received yesterday about the things that their parents were sharing with them, including books that they were reading, assignments that they were working on, meetings that they were attending, and doing these webinars. And I can't tell you how grateful they were for that. It wasn't in the sense of, well, they need to be doing their work and it's not my fault and it's not my problem and it's all their fault. But the way they talked about it is it said, it makes us feel good. And almost all of them talked about that to some extent. When I shared with them about the sibling webinars that we do, they were incredibly excited, and all of them said, is my brother or sister going to find out? Will you make sure to tell them? Make sure if my parents are on the webinar to tell them, to invite them. And so it was just this hunger for companionship in doing this work. So I wanted to pass that on to you. One of the observations I had, or observed, one of the observations that I had while I was out there was, as I was watching some of the reports, and we do a weekly report called a Milan report, where the outgoing staff and the incoming staff share information, so they share about the week. One of the things that I noticed was that as students were as staff were sharing with them the struggles they had that week, that several of the students went into the shameful place and talked about, first of all, I want to fix it. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to do better. And part of what I ask them all to do, and I talk about this sometimes, is slow down. There's this space between doing it, for lack of a better word, and there are lots of better words, for lack of doing it wrong and getting it right. There's some steps in between that are going to help you, that are more important than stopping the behavior or changing the behavior. And so as we talked about what they were doing throughout the week, that were their setbacks, their mistakes, the incidences that they participate in, I said, let's pause. Let's take a moment to look at why you're doing that. Where's that coming from? What's underneath that? Because if we just chop the weed off at the surface, you're still going to have it crop up somewhere else in the garden. And talked about that idea with the staff about following that trail of crumbs from the inappropriate behavior, from the acting out behavior, back home to the origin, back home to what was going on for them. What was the issue that was a part of it? And a lot of them had a hard time doing that. And what we talked about was they didn't feel like in the family, and this wasn't something they said, this is something I drew out, they felt like that mistakes, that the getting it right was more important than learning from it, for many of them. So I wanted to pass that on to you. One of the things they shared with me was getting transported. They call it gooning sometimes. And this was an interesting discussion because as they were sharing with me their problem with it, really what it came down to is they didn't like it that the transporters didn't tell them the truth, or that the transporters really did compromise their honesty. And a couple of boys said, I was already in the car. They didn't have to keep telling me I was only going to be gone for 2 weeks and things like that. And so I listened for a long time and empathized and said, oh, that's not what we want to have happen. That's exactly why we like to use transporters, so that nobody tells you a lie, especially parents. And then I will tell you, all of the boys, almost to a person, said, I wouldn't have gone. I would have ran away if my parents tried to transport me. So they knew that. But then the last thing that I said was, you get to feel how you feel. And I talked with them about how I teach parents when the child shares frustrations about something like this. Maybe it's sending the child to the program at all, or using transports, or anything in between, or lesser than that. My response is that I teach the parents to say, I'm sorry. I might have done it wrong. I'm sorry you were hurt. I did the best I could, but it might have been a mistake. And when I shared that response, modeled that response for them, a lot of them, you could almost see the anger kind of drain out of them. They said, that's okay. And that's actually when they started talking about, well, I would have run, I would have fought it, I would have made it miserable. One of the boys actually shared that a transporter went along with his father and he abused his father all the way through the transport. So I just wanted to share that with you, both the listening dynamic and what I shared with them and the effect that it had on them. I was really impressed during Milan where the staff member, that one of the boys, a couple of the boys said that they didn't feel safe with him. They felt like he was dismissive of their feelings. And I was so impressed of my staff, so proud of him, proud of the program. And when he just said, it kind of but interjected and said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think I was tired. I think I didn't do a good job. And I apologize that it hurt you. And I thought it was amazing. And the boys said, thank you. And it made a big difference. And I said to the staff afterwards, sometimes it's even more valuable to make a mistake and say you're sorry than to get it right all the time. And I think as parents, sometimes we're afraid to say we're sorry because we're afraid that they'll take advantage of us. But if we're truly sorry, like I've said many times, we don't care if they take advantage of us because they can't. Because that's not what it's about. Right? If they use it against us, our response is, okay, I did do it wrong. You're right. And you can still hold them accountable. I wanted to tell you that the boys were happy overall. And then we talked a lot of the boys were having impulse decisions. And we talked about how, when they were feeling threatened by somebody's feedback or by a staff boundary or whatever it was that made them feel threatened, that they felt threatened with, that's the lower part of the brain, right? The limbic system of the brain, the fight or flight, the primitive part of the brain. And that if they can learn to develop pathways to the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex, then they can learn to interrupt that fight or flight reaction. But so many of the times, their response is, I got to get better, I'm not going to do it. And I said, wait a second, let's talk about how you felt threatened, what was going on. Let's talk about how you can interrupt that before it gets to an 8 or a 9 or a 10 on the anger scale. When you can recognize the slower or more subtle feelings that you're having. Can we slow that down? And then can we develop a way of thinking about it? And the practice that you're going through is you're developing highways that don't exist in your brain. And so we were talking about brain activity and a lot of them resonated with that. So with that preview, I want to talk about the topic of tonight, which is enmeshment. Harriet Lerner said when she was writing a book, many of our problems with anger occur when we choose between having a relationship and having a self. So that's a beginning way to understand enmeshment. It is when we're in a relationship or relationships. And oftentimes we select these relationships, right? We create these in the sense that we operate in such a way and connect to people in such a way that this works this way. If we're operating at a different level of differentiation, at a different level of individuality and connection, we don't match up with some people. All that stuff about opposites attract, all that stuff about I'm not like my parents, this is what we know. If we could measure enmeshment on a scale from 0 to 100, 0, I'll say 100 being the most enmeshed, and 0 being the least enmeshed. What we know, what we can see, beyond the content, beyond the specifics, beyond the print of the wallpaper in the room, what we can see in that room is that people connect with people around their range of enmeshment. A 50 does not like to hang out with an 80 or vice versa. A 30 and a 50 don't get along. It doesn't make sense for each of them. And that's why sometimes when we move a couple of scales up on the enmeshment scale, some of those old relationships that we have don't work anymore. It's not about do you both like tennis. It's not about the fact that you both enjoy a specific activity, or you both enjoy reading, or you're both very educated. Those have something to do with the overall interest in activities, but it really comes down to we don't hang out with people that are too far away from where we're at. And in a family, we all kind of come into it with about the same level. Parents that are 72 and 78 don't raise 30s. It doesn't work. Parents that are 72 and 78 don't raise 98s on the scale. It might look different. It might have different clothing and costuming, have different activities, but we circle around the same level. I drew this. This is just my drawing. This is just my idea. But I had somebody today ask me about the idea about what's the difference between codependency and anxiety and enmeshment. And so I kind of drew that. There's lots of enmeshment that is not codependency. Most codependent people deal with a lot of anxiety. And enmeshment is a lot of it involves codependency. I could imagine enmeshment perhaps just theoretically that isn't codependency, but not very much, right? So that's kind of the way that I think about it. So you might find me using enmeshment, for example, in codependency, or even making reference to anxiety in very similar ways. So let's talk about two models from systems theories, family systems theory. Just so you know, there were several birthplaces for family therapy. Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Palo Alto, California, Milan, Italy, several coming around the same time in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And two of these schools, one was Salvador Minuchin in Philadelphia, had an idea about how to talk about boundaries and relationships. And they had different ideas. And this is what it looked like. Salvador Minuchin said, what I want to go back and say is that before family systems theory, before family therapy was a discipline, we studied individuals. We didn't talk about the system and how it interacted necessarily, but it was just an individual inside of a system. And systems theory thought, you know, I could talk about what's happening between people. I can describe that. There's a few other differences that got added, and of course, both models are helpful, but that's the basic idea. So Salvador Minuchin out of Philadelphia said this. He said, at one end of a continuum is a rigid boundary. At another end is a diffuse boundary. Clear is something in the middle. He kind of drew them like these lines down below the red bar. And he said at one end, at the extreme, it's a disengaged relationship. You know, pulled back, not responsive, not connected, not sensitive to. At the other end is enmeshment, and somewhere in the middle is normal or ideal. Now, Murray Bowen had a different idea. Murray Bowen said, on one end of the continuum is fusion, which is the same thing as enmeshment, and cutoff, which is the same thing as disengagement, and on the other end is differentiation. And fusion and cutoff, or if he were borrowing Minuchin's terms, disengagement and enmeshment are just opposite sides of the same coin. This is why sometimes I'll talk to the students who will describe a rigid parent who will cut off quickly. And I'll say, gosh, it sounds like they're really fragile. And they'll say, well, they're not fragile, but they're really tough. They're like a stone. I said, no, they're inflexible and unable to adapt and unable to stay present. And while that might look more masculine, more tough, more aggressive, it still is fragile. It still means that they can't respond with sensitivity and compassion and stay present. One of the boys who had a blow up this week in the group that I visited had that problem. He was absolutely controlled by the staff. When the staff did something that bothered him, he had no capacity to modulate himself. And so we talked about that in his session. I said, you know, I know you don't want to feel like they're in control, but they're absolutely in control. They have perfect access to your buttons. So cutoff and fusion are the opposite of differentiation. And Bowen did talk about it on a 0 to 100 scale, and he said nobody really ever gets to 100 necessarily, but it's in that direction. So that's the way that he talked about it. So I'm going to start talking about enmeshment by talking about its opposites. Okay? The first thing that I want to say is that differentiation is about the ability to keep yourself in a relationship and maintain yourself. One of the reasons why we have our program where we have students, clients, and parents far away from each other, the benefit of that, I should say, is that sometimes the distance creates an opportunity for you to find yourself. The simplest way that I can talk about it, when I go into session with my therapist weekly, and I have a moment of insight and clarity, and I get it. Maybe I'm having a conflict or an issue with my wife around parenting. And I go in there and I say, okay, I get it. I know what I want to say. I know what I feel. I know what my boundary is. And then I walk out of the session. I get in my car. I drive home. I walk in the front door. I say hi to my wife. And it's gone. All of a sudden, these voices come in like she's going to be upset, or she's going to be sad, or she's going to be anxious. My kid, I don't know what they're going to do. I'm responsible for theirs. I'm lost. My truth is now hard to access. And so sometimes being apart helps us practice finding our authenticity. That is why the letters can be so valuable, because it's not a face-to-face, real-time exchange. So you can practice finding your truth more often. What is your center? What is your core? What do you feel and think? Outside of how the other person will react. Right? And a therapist can guide you and coach you to say it in a kind, authentic, honest way. Can challenge you if it's not coming from a place of love, because he or she, the therapist that is, can sense it, can read between the lines, can feel the leakage, if you will. So differentiation is the ability to maintain yourself while in the presence of an other. And to be able to be connected to them. By connected, I mean listen and see them, understand them. That's why I say it's not an absolute, but I like to think of it that way just as a reminder. When we get angry or frustrated with others, we have lost contact with them. And that's going to happen at some point with all of us at some point in behavior. So it's not a weakness or limitation, but if we had unlimited capacity, we could see other people, even when they're being cruel or mean to us, we could see them. We might set a boundary and say, I can't be here with you. I need to remove myself. Right? We could still manage to take care of ourselves, but we wouldn't be angry or frustrated because we would understand. We would see their fears, their hurt. We would see their lack of capacity to deal with emotions, their limitations. We would see them. So, being present with an other, not sacrificing yourself. One does not rob the other. One does not steal from the other. Autonomy and connection coexist in balance. Learning to find your voice and keeping it. I kind of talked about that. I always talk about this. When we study human development, the most famous model of human development talks about this idea of these stages of development. I won't go over all of them because that's not this webinar. But one of the things that it does do that I'll borrow from is it says that identity development, which is adolescence, which can start around 12 or 13, give or take, and go into the early 20s. Adolescent development is about identity versus role confusion, is what he calls it, Erik Erikson. And so there's this loss of knowing who you are. And that's what adolescents are experimenting with. The next stage is intimacy, the young adult stage, as he calls it. And it's always been important and clear to me that identity must come before intimacy. It is the foundation of intimacy. I've shared this idea before. When parents have asked me, Brad, you're always talking about detachment. You're always talking about the distance and the differentiation. When are you going to talk about intimacy and connection? Reuniting. And as I've thought about that, I've become very clear that the first ingredient, I'll just say it very slowly, the first ingredient in intimacy or connection. Intimacy, I think we associate with peer intimacy, spousal partner intimacy, but it can be intimacy with your child too. But I'll call it connection maybe. Intimacy or connection, the first ingredient is a whole self. To the extent there is not a whole self, and that's true of all of us to some extent, then it's hard to have a connection because I don't know where I stop and you start. Right? I've said it this way. Imagine drawing a piece of chalk and a circle around where you stand on the ground. If I know where that circle is, if I know where that is, where I am, then I can see everything that's not me. But if that line has holes in it and goes all over the place, I don't know where that is. I don't know what my truth is, what I feel, what I believe, what I want. If I don't know that, then I don't know if I'm seeing you or seeing me. Some of you may have seen the movie with Julia Roberts, Runaway Bride, Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. And one of the metaphors they used to describe this throughout the movie was when he was interviewing, he was the journalist that was interviewing. He had heard of this woman who kept running away at the last minute before her marriage, at the wedding ceremony. So he was interviewing all the men that had been left at the altar. And one of the questions he asked each one of them was, how did she like her eggs? And each one of them had a dramatic, oh, she loved her eggs poached this way. Oh, she loved scrambled omelets. Oh, she loved eggs Benedict, whatever. They all had different ideas. And at the end of the movie, there's this scene when, after the climax happens, where Richard Gere, who's now dating her, gives her all the egg choices and says, what's your favorite egg? She didn't know her favorite egg because she had over-identified with each partner. Their egg became her favorite egg. And while that's a silly, simple, romantic comedy idea, that's what it is, and it can happen in parenting too, and I'll talk about that. The first ingredient. And that's why it's so important for you to do your work. That's why it's so important for you to go back and do your own personal work in therapy, in 12-step meetings. This can be a part of it, reading, whatever. That's why I believe in the intensives that we do. I feel so strongly about them. I feel so strongly about that kind of work because when you can do that work, you have a capacity to connect to your child and see them. Even if they haven't moved on the scale, you can contain them and see them better. Stylistic differences between anxious, I made up this phrase, anxious enmeshment and rigid enmeshment. Anxious enmeshment is that dependent, fawning over, pleasing, not disagreeable. One of my friends, years ago, I was at their wedding, and some older gentleman stood up at the wedding breakfast and gave a toast. And he said, if you're not fighting with each other, one of you is an idiot. At least one of you is an idiot. And he was saying it's okay that you're gonna these are young 20-somethings. They're gonna bump up against each other, find themselves in the process. So anxious enmeshment, the style is different, but it's still the same kind. The rigid enmeshment is reactive, is cold, is distancing, punishing, harsh. I've talked about this. This is a quote from my book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Parents confuse this over-identification, right? They think it's an excess of love. I love too much. It's not that. It's the opposite of that. It feels warm, and that's why when we practice differentiating away from enmeshment, it feels wrong, it feels scary, it feels foreign. Over-identification is the most severe form of poor attachment. Over-identification doesn't see the child as an other, but sees the child as an extension or reflection of the parent. In such a relationship dynamic, there's only one person, the parent. The child is altogether missing. So if I over-identify with my child, if I'm over-involved, right? That's not close. That's abandonment. That's distant. Because I'm not seeing the child. And it confuses us, but I hope that makes it clear. So I've talked about differentiation to begin to define what it is, what enmeshment is not. This is a key principle. We confuse this all the time. To love is not to need. And I'll say this as carefully as I can. Your children don't need you to need them. They don't. I know. Even from my own childhood, my parents divorced when I was around 8. My dad became less and less involved in my life through my teen years until he became minimally to not involved at all. And so one of the things that I wanted to repair, pay attention to this, I wanted to repair in the relationship with my children was my wound, right? I didn't see them, I saw me. And so I said, I used to tell them when they were little, I need you. And I thought that was healthy. I thought that was an exaggerated form of love, the most love, and it's not. It's not the same thing. They need me to take care of myself. They need me to be okay. Because if I'm not okay, if I need them, then I need them to like me. I need them to love me. I need them to think I'm a great parent. I need to be a good parent. And so if I need to be a good parent, guess what happens? They have to figure out what to do with their anger at me because it's not safe. And then how are they going to grow up? I've told this story many times. When my son moved away, I was with my therapist, and I was crying and saying, I wish I don't know what words I can find to tell him as my firstborn how much I love him. And she said, well, I started to cry. She said, he knows that you love him. He already knows exactly how much you love him. And I was comforted by that. And he was moving to New York. And she said, and he needs to get as far away from you as he can. And I laughed out loud and the pain was gone. And I remembered, that's true. My need was for him to be here. Right? It's the consuming parent need. Like, I need you to fulfill my needs. But he needed to get away and grow up. And then there would be a new kind of connection. Someday my children will be married perhaps. And I won't be in the same role. But I will love them just as much, maybe even more. And so I think we get confused sometimes, and our families of origin teach us about what it means to love, and that it comes from that needing is the highest form. It's not. They don't need that pressure. They need to know that you're going to be okay. So then they can just be a child and experiment, and your boundaries will be clear, that you'll be strong, that you'll be grounded. They need you to take care of yourself. They don't need to do it. And by the way, they're horrible at taking care of you, and it's not their job to take care of you. And so when parents talk about their children in terms of their struggles, and they say, you know, I want them to love me like when they were little, you know, they started to disrespect me, my thought is, that's kind of the deal. You can still set boundaries. I'm not saying don't set boundaries, but the interpretation might be a little bit off. And I'm going to skip down to another bullet point because I think it's important. And I'll go back. You know the movie Inside Out? The one that won the Academy Award for Best Animation Film this year? It's a great movie. Fun movie. It's a children's movie, but it's got some great humor. There's this one scene in it where they're on the thought train inside the brain, and they spill over opinions and facts, and they get all mixed up, and one of the characters is like, I don't know what to do, they're all mixed up. And the other character says, that's okay, just put them in the same bin. People do that all the time. That's a funny part. But the part that I'm thinking of, the young girl, I think she's 11 or 12 in the movie, and the parents called her our happy girl. That was their nickname for her, our happy girl. You know, they had just moved to San Francisco from Wisconsin. She was missing home. She did a Skype session with a friend, and her friend was talking about the hockey games and the new girl on the hockey team. She went to school and got embarrassed and made fun of. A few other things had gone on, and so they're sitting at the dinner table, and their happy girl is sitting there sad. And instead of sitting with the sad girl, they wanted to change her. They wanted to be something else, which is crazy. It's really crazy. So the mom asks, how you doing? How you doing? She's kind of being like a teenager, saying very little, a little bit, not disrespectful at this point, by anybody's definition, really, but not engaged. The mother gets the father's attention, and he becomes more idiotic than the mother and starts asking her, and she starts to get a little snappy. The daughter starts to get a little snappy until finally he says, where's this disrespect coming from? And I'm sitting here watching. I know it's a cartoon. I'm thinking, that's what parents do, right? That's what we do. This is not disrespect. This is a parent's lack of empathic capacity. And given the situation the daughter's in, there's no other feeling she should have. And how can you not see that? And why is your empathic muscle broken? And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the interpretation, your children aren't doing it to you. Even when they're doing it to you, they're not doing it to you. And the 4 Agreements by Miguel Ruiz, which we recommend to lots of our clients and students and families, he says don't take it personal because it's not about you. It's never about you. When people tell you you're great, it's not about you. When people tell you you're the worst in the world, that's not about you. When they punch you in the face, that's not about you. But because we don't have a full self, and we can't see ourselves, we think it's about us. The more we do this work, when somebody calls us the worst in the world, we can see something about them. When somebody says we're the greatest, we can see something about them. So why was their empathic muscle not working? Because they most likely didn't have empathic resonance when they were a child. Their parents didn't have the capacity to see them. And that's what's true for us. If we can be seen, then we can bring that process into our other relationships. And we can earn it. There's kind of an earned differentiation that we can develop. An earned capacity as we do this work. The more work we do, we earn it, we grow it. Going back to the bullet points right above, praise is not a need. I had that as In the Inside Out, she was praised for being the happy one, which is just as crazy as being the smart one, just as crazy as being the talented one, the cute one. That's not a self. That's a tiny piece of a self. Being happy is one tiny piece. Being a great singer is a tiny piece. Being really good at math is a tiny piece. And children easily confuse all of that praise with affection and love, and it's not the same thing. That's why so many times when we start to coach parents and children do amazing things, the response is, wow, how'd that feel? What was that like? It seems like you can be proud of yourself. It seems like you worked hard on that. When I was sharing this idea with a young adult who had a ton of shame about the things he had done as a drug addict, young adult child, and I was saying, I don't even have the inclination to be proud of my children or to be disappointed in them. I suppose it can happen. It hasn't happened in a long time either way. And he looked at me, he looked up because he'd been looking down. I said, nobody's like you. Wouldn't you be proud if your daughter got into Harvard? And I thought, not if I'm grounded. I don't think I would. I'd be happy for her if she worked hard for it. I'd be curious about what that meant, and I'd congratulate her on her hard work and all that represented, but not when I'm grounded, no. It doesn't matter to me. It's not my life. It's not my truth. I don't know her truth. I barely know my own. How could I possibly assume to know hers? And so it's our job to support them on their journey, not be on it with them. It's our job to be on our journey. And if we do this right, we get to stay connected to them while they're on their journey. We get to be a part of it in the sense that they want to be with us. They want to spend holidays with us. They want to see us. They want to share problems with us because we don't fix it. We don't make it right. It doesn't make us anxious. When they struggle and snap at us, it doesn't even hurt us sometimes because we know it's not about us. You know what that's like in relationship. We all know. We've all had that moment where somebody snapped at us, and because we were in a good place, we didn't even get hurt because we were able to say nothing at all and just listen. Or say, what's going on? Are you hurt? Or gosh, I'm sorry, what's going on? You know we can develop greater capacity in these areas. Learning the difference between what is your need and their need is critical, of course. That gets confusing all the time. Parents, when considering aftercare, when considering length of stay, when considering the phone calls that they're having, the visits that they're having, get very confused because they miss their child. They love their child. They want their child. They're having problems and difficulty with labor pains of what I call the second birth. That's what adolescence is, right? It's the pulling away. It's the second birth. And so when we go through those labor pains and we struggle with that, we get confused about what they need and what we need. And sometimes they can play off of that, right? Sometimes they can play off of that. That's why it's important for us to be more clear because they'll tell us things that we want to hear. Gosh, I want to come home too, Mom, Dad. I want to have a phone call this week too. And so we think, well, gosh, it is their need. It's not necessarily their need. It's their want. But we don't take the adolescents. Maybe young adults, of course, have a different level of autonomy. Of course, legally they do. But we don't take the want at face value. We listen to it. That's why parents say, don't we ask them what they want? I say, absolutely. And that tells us something about them. We learn about them when they share their wants. But we don't take it at face value. And it doesn't become an equal vote in the decision-making process. Right? So learning your need and their need. Again, it all is really, it's all really dependent on our capacity to first know ourselves. That's the first place to go to there. You know, I'm going to go off script a little bit. Another thing. Parents say to me all the time, well, I know my child best. And my thought is, what makes you think that? You know, sometimes parents know their children well, but that's not my experience. Here's what the difference is. I love my children more than you could ever love my children. More than any therapist could ever love my children. Nobody's going to win. Their mother is going to come in a tie. But nobody's going to love them more. But people might know them better, for sure. You know when you're in the forest, it's hard to see the trees. You know when you're in water, it's hard to find it. It's hard to discover it. So don't mix up loving them the most with knowing them the most. That's why other professionals, even other parents at parent support groups or other parents at Al-Anon or CODA, peers that we trust, not just a random person, because that's not the same thing, but someone that's in a mentor role with us can help us, right? Can help us figure out and say, teach us how to see better, how to hear better. Objectifying is this idea of turning our child into a reflection of ourselves. Every one of us does it. Every one of us on this webinar does it. I was just talking with a family the other day, and the boy has some gender fluidity. And he started off with saying, you told me not to paint my nails, not to do this at our family reunion, and you're not allowing me to be me. And the parents were pretty progressive and had to pause, had never admitted it to this point, I don't think, to their son, and said, yeah, that was our problem, not yours. And we did put it on you. We did ask you to be something else so that we could feel comfortable. Or when we tell our children went to Harvard. My son got into a scholarship at the Art Institute of Chicago. My daughter's in community college. My son's in wilderness. My son's in a rehab. It's okay, we struggle with that. And so part of this work, part of the way that our wonderful children stretch us is they ask us to confront all of our stuff around image and ego, because we all have it. And they have a sense that we're a reflection, that we turn them into a mirror. I've told the story many times about my son bullying somebody in the neighborhood years ago when he was a teenager. And my reaction was absolutely inappropriate on many levels, because I was so embarrassed. And I turned it into righteous indignation with him. Justified myself. But really I was embarrassed. What I do for a living, and I walk around, people know what I do for a living sometimes, and I'm with my children, I am so self-conscious about the fact that my parenting might be on, right? Like they're going to judge me. We all have our insecurities. We all have our issues. And if our children's successes and failures become about us, if there's small struggles, big struggles, talents become about us. It's like the time I told people when I got congratulated that my son was in school after having gone to wilderness therapy and had a scholarship. And they congratulated me. My thought was, I took a step back and thought, I don't understand why you would congratulate me. I didn't do it. But like I said, if you congratulated me on my patience, if you congratulated me on some of the work that I've done with my own family of origin, if you congratulated me on my ability to listen, I absolutely would say thank you very much. I worked really hard on that. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you noticing. So there's a difference between my success and failures and my children's success and failures. And as we do this work, we get more and more clear about that. And so be loving and patient and compassionate with yourself when you slip, because we're all going to slip. Learning to listen and to hear each other. Enmeshment doesn't do that. Enmeshment is all confused about who is who and what is what, and where you stop and where they start. This is an exercise that I do at our intensives, and we kind of go through it, but I want to illustrate it right here. We call it the 3 circles. There are 3 circles, if you can imagine those drawn out on the ground, maybe the size of hula hoops. And the first circle is your circle. So I ask clients to step in their circle. You have 2 jobs in your circle. First, it's to know your truth. And what is your truth? What you think, what you feel, what you want, what you believe. Right? That's your truth. And your second job is to keep people out of your circle. And what does that look like? That looks like saying to somebody in a discussion, you said that to me already, I'm not going to go there with you, or I'm not going to have this discussion anymore, or I don't want to be talked into it, or I get to feel what I'm feeling, and I don't want you to talk me out of it. Those kinds of things. In marriages, we get into this all the time. The second circle is the relationship circle. And that job, and that responsibility, it's your job to express your truth. That is, you make requests of the other person, you share feelings and thoughts, you can offer support, right? And it's important in this circle that you share that circle. That's a shared circle. And I'll talk about in a moment how people take that circle over. And then the other circle, their job, just like yours, is to know their truth and to keep people out of their circle. And sometimes we get into our children's circle. We try to convince them of our truth instead of set our boundary. I'm going to say that again because that's it. That's the difference. We try to convince our children of our truth instead of setting our boundaries. And we do that by lecturing, teaching, moralizing, nagging, repeating ourselves, begging, pleading, manipulating, guilting, instead of just saying, here's my boundary, here's the limit. I'll listen to how you feel about it. I'll consider it, but here's what it is. Sometimes we take over the relationship circle because we say it happened today or yesterday in a relationship between me and my wife. We talked about this. We use this analogy all the time. I said, yeah, I'll take care of my circle. You can express yourself. You don't have to take care of my circle, or vice versa. So the way it looks is, well, I don't want to tell her how I feel. I don't want to tell her what I'm thinking because she's going to get upset. I don't want to ask her to help, right? Because she's going to feel guilty and do it, or she's not going to take care of herself. So what this looks like in relationships is I say, here's my truth. This is what I want. This is what I believe. This is what I'm asking for. I trust that you're going to take care of your circle. That's stepping one foot in. But oftentimes, we avoid telling our truth. I don't want to ask my brother to move because he's going to feel guilty and he's going to do it. That's me taking over the circle. My brother now is not even participating in the relationship with me. So we say, we learn this language, we share it, and we suggest to them that they have the permission to take care of themselves. And then we get in their circle, it's their job to kick us out. They get in our circle, it's our job to kick them out. This is not just to parent-child, this is to any person to any person. You've repeated yourself several times to me, so I don't know what you're trying to do because I think I've heard you, and it feels like maybe you want me to believe what you believe, but I don't. I'm not going to do that. Right? So it's a good analogy. We codependents allow our empathy to rob us of our boundaries. Many of us have felt so unheard in our lives that we try to heal that wound that we project onto others. We project that wound that we have had onto others, and we overcompensate, and we understand, and our understanding prevents us. We feel too much fear at setting a boundary because we think that person is going to experience the same pain that we did. And Siegel and Hartz will say it this way: when parents understand that they can let their children have and express their desires without having to fulfill them, it frees the parent to make a connection to the child's experience without having to deny their feelings. If you want copies of these slides, please email us at webinar@drbradreed.com, or if you're on the parent portal, you can always go there. That's a great quote, and I spelled Daniel Siegel's name wrong. But that's an amazing, amazing idea, right? When parents understand that they can let their children have and express their desires without having to fulfill them, it frees the parent up to make a connection, to experience the child, to a connection to the child's experience without having to deny their feelings. I butchered that, but you can read. I'll tell you what it does for the child. It is liberating. While they will use this against us in their youth, as they grow older and over, it's exhausting. It is smothering. It is erasing. It is miserable to have a parent who can't tolerate your feelings and feels like every time you share it, it has to be fixed or given into because of that parent's anxiety, inability, lack of sense of self. So, this is important. Yes, people in our lives might use this against us at times, but overall, it is not a sustainable aspect of a relationship for somebody not allowed to have their feelings and feel like you have to do something about it. And being held hostage by your guilt. Further with Harriet Lerner. No matter how long I'm in therapy, I'm still going to feel guilty if I say no to my father. An adult woman was saying in a story. But if I keep saying yes, I'm going to feel angry. So, if I'm going to change, I guess I'll just have to learn to live with some guilt for a while. That's the way out. That's why I'm so down on guilt. That's why I'm so sick and tired of pop psychologists saying that there's healthy guilt. How do you know? Right? How do you know that it's healthy guilt? Your dad says, I'm worried about you smoking marijuana, I love you, please don't do it. How do you know the difference between that and when your 17-year-old boyfriend says, please have sex, I love you, if you cared about me, you would do it? Or when you're 35 years old and your mother says, I wish you would come to church with me, my church, not your church, my church. And if you know, I care about you and I love you, please do it. You're killing me. It breaks my heart. How do you know? You don't is the answer. Because you've been hardwired. This is enmeshment. You've been hardwired to believe that somebody else's feelings are about you. That when mom and dad are upset, it's my fault. When mom and dad are happy, it's my fault. When mom and dad are proud, it's my fault. And why do I think that? Because they told me that. And why did they tell me that? Because their parents told them that. Because they were raised by their parents to think that their parents' upsetness or happiness or being pleased or disappointed or sad or discouraged or worried was about them. And it wasn't always. It wasn't necessarily at all about them, ever. It can inform you, you can listen, but that's not how we parent, folks. That's not it. This is different. This is not pop psychology. This is real psychology. This is not our instinct necessarily. This is not what they're going to talk about on Dr. Phil. This is real psychology. This is real developmental psychology. Ideally, we don't parent by telling our children how we feel so they'll change our behaviors to make us feel differently. We then hardwire them to have no sense of who they are, separate from another individual. They become susceptible to peer pressure, don't know who they are. We set boundaries, we set limits, we have consequences. We can share our feelings, but we're very clear to own them as ours. We're very clear to be responsible for going to take care of them. That if we have a lack of serenity, a lack of peace, a lack of happiness, that's my fault, not yours. That's my responsibility. It might be hard. Our children are difficult. Our children ask a lot of us. Some of your children are requiring a great deal of growth and stretching you, no doubt about it. They are addicts. They are cutting themselves. They're doing harmful things. They do crazy things. But they're going to get free of us one way or the other. I have a little bit of passion about it. We codependents resent other people instead of becoming clear about our own boundary issues. That's kind of like it's like this quote. This is another Dance of Anger, Harriet Lerner. Favorite book on boundaries, the Dance of Anger. Anger is a tool for change only when it challenges us to become less of an expert on others and more of an expert on ourselves. So if you're feeling resentful or angry, guess what? You got a problem. I know that. I read this, felt so convicted. And I love to be resentful. I love to be the victim. I love to talk about how everybody else is not like me. I would never treat me that way. I would never treat you that way. I don't do that to you. Well, guess what? It's my job to take care of me, not theirs. So, we codependents resent instead of becoming more clear about our own boundaries issues. We refuse to set boundaries, and then we resent others for not respecting us. We do everything but set a boundary. We beg, we plead, we lecture, we whine, we yell, we threaten, we debate, we guilt the other person, we hope, we cut off, we do everything in the world except for set a boundary. Why? Because it's terrifying. Why? Because we are then told we are selfish. We believe we are selfish. We were told we were selfish when we were children. When we exceeded our parents' capacity to be empathic and contain us, they told us we were selfish to get us back in line. And so when people in our lives tell us that, we believe it. We don't know the difference. We don't know the wiring, if you will. I talked about this. We project onto our children, and then we try to heal our wounds by parenting them, by giving them what we didn't need. I talked about that earlier, right? We assume we know. We assume we see. We try to compensate for what our parents didn't do. And while, again, stylistically, we might look very different from our parents, we might have a very different political stance, we still remain about the same level of differentiation if we don't sort this out. And I'm going to say it this way. There's only one way you're going to sort it out, and that's go to therapy. Oh, I could imagine 12-step groups being a close substitute for it. But you're not going to do it on your own. You're not going to do it with your friends, your girlfriends, your boyfriends. It's therapy. That's it. That's how you do it. And it doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It means you're a good parent if you go. If you have lots of issues, guess what? We all have a lot of issues. We all have a various level of issues. That's not the marker for being a good or a bad parent. The marker for being a healthier versus an unhealthy parent is who's working on it, who's going to meetings or therapy. If you can't afford therapy, if therapy isn't your thing, go to meetings. They're free. Maybe $1 a meeting if you donate to the basket as it comes around. That's how we take care of it. That's how we take back our responsibility. That's how we stop asking our children to take care of us. I've spent a lot of my life being resentful because I expected other people to do this for me. Expected my wife to do it. She expected me to do it. For a lot of years, we thought it was love to take care of the other person. It's not. Not at the cost of the self. Not at the cost of authenticity. Not at the cost of resentment. If I can do it lovingly and it can be a gift, then it's good. So a friend said to me the other night, I was talking about my own self-care and I was struggling with it. It's actually why I canceled the webinar on Monday. The webinar was on grief and loss, and I had just lost a friend the day prior. And I almost did the webinar, and I thought to myself later on in the day, it's crazy. I need to take care of myself today. I can't do a webinar on grief and loss. I'm in my own grief and loss right now. I'll do it in a week or two. And I got to cancel the webinar. I'm not going to do any webinar tonight. My friend had texted me the morning before he took his own life. And I was going to show up for work. So I'm talking to my friend about this, and he was the one that talked me through it, and I ended up canceling the webinar. And he said to me, the world would be a better place if Brad Reedy takes care of himself. That doesn't mean I become self-centered and selfish. It means that I take care of myself so I can take care of all of you. Because if I don't take care of myself, I can't do any of these webinars. I can't go out to the field. I can't be there for my wife and my children. If my belly is empty, I will starve to death. And I'm not selfish for taking care of myself. And it's not exclusive of taking care of others. If I take care of others, expecting that I'll magically be taken care of, or that experience will make me feel good about myself, and that will be enough, guess what? I'm not taking care of you. I'm taking care of me. In fact, I need you to be happy and grateful. I need you to like it. I need you to think I'm a good guy. I need you to reciprocate. Then I need other people in the world to magically show up and do for me what I just did for you. Either you, because it's a secret exchange that I haven't told you about, it's a gift with strings attached, or others. And then I end up at home whining that nobody's doing for me what I do for everybody else. So that's all these are my battles. Do for others and hope they will reciprocate. I've said that a few times. So here's the take home. When you set boundaries, your loved ones are going to unconsciously, sometimes consciously tell you to change back. Prepare for it. You're not going to be, when you set boundaries, nobody's going to applaud necessarily. I might, if I'm your therapist, but if I'm your spouse, I'm probably going to tell you, this is super uncomfortable, I like it the old way. But, point is, don't expect applause. Expect just the opposite. Expect to be called names. Expect to be told that you're doing it wrong, this feels wrong. Why are you listening to Brad Reedy? Why are you listening to your Vogue therapist? You sound like you sound like a robot. You sound like you're uncaring. You're so selfish. Right? Whatever the buttons are that you have, they'll find them because you've trained them. Healthy boundaries will feel scary, cold, formal, or wrong. That's how they feel. If it doesn't feel that way, at times as you go through this work and try new boundaries with people, you're probably not making substantial change. Balance self and connection. Neither sacrifices the other. You can have both. If a relationship needs you to sacrifice who you are, core pieces of who you are, that doesn't mean we don't sacrifice. Love and marriage and parenting is about transformation, and transformation and sacrifice go hand in hand. But if it asks you to sacrifice core pieces of who you are, who you need to feel alive and okay, then take a step back and reconsider. You must have help to do your own work. When you can see yourself, you can see others easily. In The Knight in Rusty Armor, when the knight wished that Merlin would show up and then had a question in his head and then Merlin answered it, he asked him if he could read minds. And the knight said, since I know myself, I know you. I could give other examples, but it's the simple one. The way I know you, the way I know my clients, my capacity, whatever it is, to know my children is really an exact measure of how well I know myself in many ways. And when I know myself, I can see it in you. So often I'll sit in session with somebody, I'll hear them talking about a story that they're going through in their life and what's going on, and I'll say, here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing this, this, and this. And I see you kind of explaining yourself in this way. I think that tells me, what that tells me is that maybe you think I needed to be this way. I had a client say to me today, the client said to me, oh, I'm sorry, I'm off topic. And I said, this is a small thing, but what do you mean off topic? I don't need you to be on topic. This is not my therapy session. You get to show up any way you want. You could sit there here the whole time in the session texting if you wanted to. You could sit here reciting the alphabet in Hebrew if you wanted to. But what I was illustrating, and it was, of course I know her and there were other things, is that there's more. That's what her context taught her. That when she didn't show up according to their truth, she was wrong. And she was too big. You know, when I was a little kid, my mother used to say, Brad, you're being melodramatic, or you're being this or that. But melodramatic was a word. And I was confused and hurt and frustrated and ashamed of that. And my mother said to me, and some of you have heard me tell you this, my mother said to me a year ago, she had this head injury and it turned her into a little child. She fell down, hit her head, was in a coma for 13 days, and then all of her guile, all of her pretense went away. It's like the movie Finding Henry with Harrison Ford. She became like this little child. And so I'm driving her back to the airport after a visit to my house, and she said to me, you were too big for me. I'm sorry. And I said, what, Mom? What do you mean? She said, I didn't know what to do with you. You were smarter than I was, and you were just too big. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you in the way you needed. And she's 74, right? I'm in my mid-40s, late 40s. And I'm thinking to myself, that's a gift. And I've found that out in therapy, but it was really nice to hear from her. And some of your children are too big for you. That's okay. And it's okay to set boundaries. And it's okay to get help. You need help. We need help. I can't do this on my own. As educated and as much as I practice about parenting, I can't do this on my own. I need help. I'll take a couple of live questions and then we might move them back to the next open forum. Actually, Michael, before you do that, I'm going to stop. Michael, don't do it. I'm going to go to these things and then I'm going to go to questions and answers. So here are the upcoming intensives and workshops. I just added the June and July workshops. Finding You is for any adult. Heroic Journeys is for families, so multi-families. There's the workshop on the left side of your screen. These intensives on the right. Workshops are great. We want every family to go to those. The intensives are if you want to do more work, and we strongly encourage you to take advantage of these. When I told the boys in Group 6 at Entrada about these, they're like, I hope my parents go to it. Here are the upcoming parent support groups: Chicago, Southern California, New York City. I'll be doing a one in May in Northern California and in Los Angeles in May also. So you can contact Stephanie at evoketherapy.com to RSVP for more information. These can be for families. These are sober, fun, high adventure trips. We want all families to go to 6 of these meetings. These are free. Follow us on social media, mostly to keep up with announcements, but some inspirational stories. The book is available on paperback, audio also. You can go to the foundation page to find many books that we recommend. Oh, and I'm going to do one more thing, and then we'll go to it. This is next week. I want to tell all of you we have a lot of people on. For siblings, please invite the siblings. Please let them know about this. If they're young, you can attend it with them. Please tell them to send in questions in advance. 2 things happen. Number 1, I get to respond to them and make some connection for them between their brother or sister and them. I'm that conduit for them. They can ask me direct questions. I can answer. I can respond to them. Another thing that I do is I model for you all about how to respond to some of the difficult things that they say to you. And then the next night, I put them on the same page because we won't have enough time to give as much notice as we would like. The next night, I'm going to do the one on grief and loss. All right, folks. Any questions? I have time for a couple. Can you suggest a resource to the 3 circles? I didn't quite get that whole idea. It's a tough one to run through, isn't it? I've only heard it orally, and then I've kind of redone it myself, so I don't know. I would encourage you, I guess the best thing I'd say is encourage you to read the book, The Dance of Anger, and or watch the webinar, Dance of Anger. It needs to be in interaction. I know. I thought it might be helpful to two of you, but it's much more helpful in interaction so we can go back and forth with questions. How can we avoid getting enmeshed when our child comes home from treatment? Go to therapy. Go to your therapy. Go to your therapy. Learn to fight your guilt. Focus on you. I'm going to be repetitive. Folks, there's nothing you can do more to help your child maintain the gains that they accomplish while wilderness and aftercare than to do your own work. Your own work about you, about your parents, about your brothers and sisters, about your young childhood, your adolescence, your young adulthood, your marriage. Do your work. That's what you can do. Work on every day drawing that circle of chalk around you. And when you know where that line is, you know where it's not. In the beginning, you mentioned that opposites don't really attract. What do I do if my husband and I no longer want the same things in our lives? That's a great question. I thought you were going to say, what happens? Should I divorce my husband if we don't like the same things? I don't have marital advice, obviously, for you about what to do, but if you can find common ground. I mean, folks, I do this for a living. I've been going to therapy. We have the same therapist. We go to marital therapy. I've been doing it for 18 years. We don't go to marital therapy every week. That for some time it was often, but invite your husband into it. You know, another thing I would say to you, you're going to laugh at this, and it's not for a lack of answers. It's actually because it's the right answer. Go to therapy. Do your work. Get clear. Get clear. If he won't go to therapy, go to therapy yourself and figure out what part is yours and what part is not yours, and what part is him, and what your participation in the dance, in the dynamic is yours. And when you get clear of that, you might come back with more compassion, love, and patience. You might come back with a clear understanding of, this is not what I want. The things that you're doing, the way that you're living, is not the way I want to live. And so I want to invite you into that. But if it doesn't work for you, then maybe we have to go a different path. I don't know. No therapist should ever advise you on that. But do your own work. Figure out what's at the core of it. Oftentimes the differences are deeper. So many of the discussions we have in relationships don't come to resolution because we're not talking about what's really going on. We have the same argument over and over again because we're never talking about the real thing. That's why. I have a webinar, by the way, on couples work. So if you want to go to that, couples work is one of the webinars where we talk about what work you have to do. Recently, my son has transitioned from a residential treatment center to their step-down facility. He has begun telling huge lies about absurd things. What do you suggest I say when confronting a story statement that I know is a lie? I don't want to elicit an angry response from him, but I don't want him to think I believe it either. Okay, this is great. This is so great. I'm so glad because I actually forgot to mention a specific point. And I'll use this as an example. So if I were talking to your son, this is what I might say. I would say, I'll call him Jimmy. Hey, Jimmy, my experience is that I'm hearing you say things that aren't true. And if he argues, you say, well, I'm not going to debate about it. It's just my experience. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm wrong, but my experience is that you're telling things that aren't true. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what's going on. And so you can, when I talk to my clients from 14-year-olds to 54-year-olds, I can confront them and say, I see this thing you're doing, but I want to understand you. I don't care that you got high today. I don't care that you lied to me today. I don't care that you tried to hit me today. What I care about is what's going on. Can we figure that? That's more important. And that if we can teach them to follow the trail of crumbs back home to the original wound, to what's going on, to this fear, to this, if we can teach them that, then we don't just give them a fish and feed them for a day. We teach them how to fish and feed them for a lifetime. So if we can teach them the process by saying whatever the behavior is, even though it terrifies us, if we can manage that terror somewhere else with our own therapist and then come back and say, I would love to be a part of the solution. What's going on? You just yelled at me. And you must have felt scared or small or hurt. And so you teach them to figure out what's going on. That's what we do in therapy. That's what we do in our program. And it's hard as a parent because we have limited emotional resources. So we get practice, and you need help, you need support. And it's not a book, it's not even just the webinars, but it's therapy, or at least going to these meetings that we talk about each week on these webinars. We want all parents to go to 6 of those while their children are here. All right, folks, that's all the time for questions. Look forward to, I hope this was helpful. Please tell all of your other siblings, any age, to come to this webinar. Please have them send in questions to webinar@drbradreedy.com in advance. I'll post all those. I'll also take live questions, and it's been incredibly sweet. And like I said, just as a sample, the group 6 boys in Entrada want their siblings to be on here. I think it's incredibly, incredibly great for them to have that kind of support. Have a great weekend, folks, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.